All right, welcome to the latest episode of the Coleman Power Organic Fitness Podcast. I have my latest guest here, Steve, in front of me, also known as Tan Man on Instagram, and I'm sure on other social media platforms too. All right, Steve, say hello to the listeners, and I suppose give yourself an introduction, like kind of your elevator pitch. All right.
Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm excited to be here. Thanks to Coleman for reaching out. I'm really Tan Man on Instagram and Twitter and TikTok. I started my little social media presence like earlier last year, making TikTok videos about the Weston Price Nutrition and Physical Degeneration book and his nutritional anthropology research, which somehow became very popular on TikTok, much to my surprise. And so after that, I kind of got a bit more into social media, Instagram, did a Twitter, and recently I started a company, which we'll talk about at the end of the show, called Shire, which is going to help people get access to healthy, high quality food.
And that's what we're here for. We're both into food, right? The two of us are mad about it. But I suppose I want you to tell people, how did you first get into, like, I suppose, the lifestyle that you live as well as what you currently eat on a daily basis? We were kind of talking about it before we started the show, but I just want you to say some of the topics we discussed.
Sure. So like many people, I grew up never cooking for myself. My mom cooked every single thing that I'd ever eaten. And when I went to college, it was the same thing, right? Dining halls, right? I never cooked. And so there was an internship I had the summer after freshman year, which was in Europe, where I had to, like, for the first time, cook for myself. And in doing that, not only was I like learning how to cook, pans, pots, boiling, frying, this and that, but I also got a firsthand insight into how what I was cooking affected my health and how I felt after. And I was never like really sick as a kid, but I always had health problems, more so than maybe average. I got the flu often, I got colds, I was always congested, my nose was always runny. And so it was very surprising to me that for the first time, by doing specifically, I remember reading about paleo. This was like in probably 2014, sorry. And I remember reading about paleo, so I cut out rice. And I'd always eaten a lot of rice. So I stopped eating rice, and all of a sudden, like, my nose stopped running. Like, I'd been congested literally like for years of my life. Like, I could never go more than 20 feet from a box of tissues. And for whatever reason, I had like a sensitivity to rice. Maybe it's unique to me. It's not very common, honestly. But I found this, and I was like floored that it was possible that food could have such an impact on something that I thought was just part of my life. And so from there, I started researching more and experimenting more in different diets and things. But that was really the impetus that kind of that started the whole process of me learning how the food and lifestyle affects the way that you feel.
Yeah, I had a very similar experience. I was living up until I was the age of 24, and then I went to immigrate to Australia, and literally hearing about all these different diets, and I got sick of cooking chicken, broccoli, and rice, and I suppose decided I wasn't a bodybuilder back then and switched to, I suppose, a more whole food approach. But I want to expand on the, like, so what are the foods that you currently eat, and what are the ones that you recommend to people that you either come across or mentor or coach?
Sure. Yeah. So my diet right now, it's gone through a lot of evolutions, but it's in many ways come somewhat full circle. First of all, I think everything that you eat should be organic, and like as naturally produced as possible. I mean, organic, of course, as I'm sure you're well aware, is very broad specification.
Certainly.
So you want it to be as organic as you can, right? It's not all created equal. So I primarily eat meat, organs, dairy, root vegetables, fruit, and some kind of grains and other things as like an accessory, for fun, like sourdough bread. Like I got into it at one phase of my dietary evolution. I started making like freshly milled whole grain sourdough bread, which is just delicious. Like, there's just no arguing this. It's just so good. And for many people, like, it's very controversial to say that you should eat bread, like, for certain people. But I feel better when I eat it in many ways. Like, my digestive system works a bit better when I have like a moderate amount of like very high quality bread. So I'll eat that. And I don't really eat too many nuts, or like no nuts or legumes or like seeds. And I don't really eat many like leafy vegetables, but I like squashes are good. Like the starchy vegetables they're really the fruits, right? Like squashes are fruits.
Yes,
Um,
correct.
yeah, exactly. So like avocados are fruit. So fruits are all good. And root vegetables like potatoes, I eat a ton of potatoes, a ton of butter, ton of eggs, ton of raw milk, meat, organs, jello, like gelatin is very important as well. And fruits and fruit juices. So that's basically what I think is what I've come to in as the steady state for me that I think works best.
Cool. And I want you even to, I suppose, go more further expanding on the point of raw milk, and suppose giving the definition just for the listeners, what is raw milk and where do you get it, and what are your, I suppose, ethoses for consuming it on a regular basis for
Sure.
health?
Yeah, raw milk is unnecessarily controversial. Raw milk refers to milk which has not been pasteurized. Any milk that you can find in the store of any so-called developed country is going to be pasteurized, which means that the milk was heated to a certain temperature, usually close to or exceeding boiling point after it comes from the cow. And it's heated up to like for a certain amount of time and then bottled. And the argument for pasteurization is that it kills harmful bacteria that are in the milk, making it safer for human consumption. Now, that's not exactly my take on the whole pasteurization thing, and we can get into that. But yeah, raw milk is not really widely accessible in some countries. Like in Canada, I have a lot of followers that are always like DMing me, asking me if like I know of a place for them to get it, and it's like you guys really like the Canadian government is really crazy when it comes to this sort of thing. Whereas in Maine, like the state, like the US state, like Maine up in the Northeast, they actually recently passed a state constitutional amendment that recognized like food sovereignty as like a universal right, meaning like the state cannot tell anyone anything about what food they can or can't eat, like under any circumstances, which is like amazing, right? It gives complete control over people to like grow food how they want, eat food how they want. Like it's pretty awesome. So one of the things also that happens in America too is like a lot of immigrants from like say the Middle East or India, they eat raw milk, like it's ubiquitous, like where they come from. And then they come to the US and then like they go to the grocery store and buy milk and they think it's garbage. So like so many of the customers of raw milk in America in the US are like from these places where they've just been doing it, traditionally, basically for thousands of years. And they just don't even understand why we're pasteurizing it. So the reason why pasteurizing is bad is because it denatures certain nutrients. For example, it destroys lactoferrin, denatures retinol, which is vitamin A. It also messes with ceruloplasmin, and it messes with the structure of the proteins. But the other thing that it also does is it allows farmers who use poor quality methods to be able to sell a product that won't get people sick. And this comes back to the reason why pasteurization was invented and required. In the 1800s, like in certain places like New York City, they kept cows in like these disgusting warehouses, like in Brooklyn, where they would feed them like literal the trash. They would feed them the trash from New York City, feed the cows. They would feed them like the byproducts of like whiskey production, like the barley and the grain and the corn that's all fermented. They would feed that to the cows. Like the milk would come out toxic. And there was one instance, I think in like 1850 something, where like 8,000 babies died, like human babies, because they were eating milk from these cows that was basically toxic. And so instead of course, making sure that cows are fed an appropriate diet, and instead of making sure that they're out in the grass where they belong, they realized that by pasteurizing, you could kill the bacteria that had, grown in the milk. And because bacteria love, like toxic environments like that, they could just kill the bacteria and then solve the problem. And so, I mean, it worked in that sense. But of course, it doesn't really solve the problem, which, most of the solutions of the modern health practice, that's what they do. And so it made the milk just eatable, basically. And it didn't require farmers to produce like a higher quality product.
Yeah. Anywhere you're adding process is typically killing a beneficial item in food, whole foods, such as whole raw milk. And that's the beneficial factor, that raw milk being a natural probiotic, which is good for your gut health, and gut health being linked with every different, I suppose, process. Firstly, your immune system, which definitely could do with a booster right now, a natural booster from the likes of whole foods such as pre and probiotics. But where do you, I suppose, get the likes of your raw milk yourself? And touching on that point, that maybe people could, I suppose, lean towards trying to get it themselves. Where do you get yours?
Yeah, so that's kind of the challenge. It's not very easy to find. And in the U.S., different states have legalized it to different extents. So, for example, in Connecticut, where I am currently residing, you can just go to any store and it's like they're able to sell it like on the shelves at the supermarket, which is, it's very permissive. It's fantastic. But in other states, I believe Massachusetts is an example, you can only buy it if you go to the farm. Like a store like can't sell it. And in Florida, for example, you can buy it, but it's not approved for human consumption. So you go to the farm stand and buy raw milk and it says like not for human use, like for pet consumption only. It's like, I'm gonna give this gallon of chocolate milk to my dog. Yeah, okay. But that's the way the law works, and that's what we do. And then in other states, it's like completely like not allowed. I think Wisconsin, ironically, is one such state, because Wisconsin is a big dairy state, but it's a big dairy industry state. And dairy industry is typically like opposed to raw milk, because raw milk is a much higher quality product than they are able to sell. And so if they allowed it on the market, like they would have more competition.
Yeah,
And
saw that, man.
and the farmers, so the other thing is the way that it works is like, because of pasteurization, there's one or two pasteurization facilities like in each state. And so all the milk produced in that state has to run through those pasteurization facilities. So it's a lot easier for farmers like to sell their milk wholesale. Like they create contracts with these larger distributors. Like they sell their milk wholesale with like Land of Lakes or some other like Organic Valley, even if it's like higher quality, like whatever. They have contracts with these dairy producers that come around in big like oil tanker trucks. Like they take the milk and they bring it to some pasteurization facility. It all gets mixed together. They put it in bottles and they send it out to the grocery store shelves. And so that is very good for those dairy middlemen. But it's terrible for the farmers themselves, because if they were able to sell a high value it's a high value product like raw milk at smaller scale direct to consumer, they can charge a lot of money. They could charge insane margins and keep all that money for themselves. So the dairy industry is very much opposed to that happening. And that's part of the problem that's part of the reason for like the legal like framework that we currently have. So yeah, finding it is difficult because it's not very common, first of all. And if it is common, or if it is available, it's like usually only done by small farmers, kind of out of the way. And so it can be hard to find. Like there are certain websites that, each of whom have like decent listings for the different farmers, but then sometimes it's out of date. You got to call them. Sometimes you got to show up. Sometimes you got to order it online, and like you got to go pick it up at a delivery point. It's like it's like sketch. It's like a drug deal, basically. You have to like
And it's
go
Whole
to
Foods. It's Whole Foods.
Yeah.
I mean, we've gone so far away when food has come from, literally going straight to the farm, going to a country market where it literally has less miles than you going to the store, and it's a label and packet and air miles on it and everything else thrown in between. I suppose I even want to lean towards the likes of like raw milk being good for your gut being linked with your organs, and the skin being your largest organ. What do you recommend, I suppose, for like vitamins and foods more so that are good for skin health? Like staying away from the likes of pesticides and going to local farms, I suppose, being
for skin health. That's so milk actually. So skin requires like vitamin A, retinol, not beta carotene. There's like a distinction. So many people think that beta carotene is vitamin A, which is not. It's a precursor to vitamin A. And so your body must convert it, and whether or not that conversion happens and to what extent is not so clear. So retinol is needed for skin health because it takes part in like basically the building of the proteins of your skin, the keratinization process that requires retinol to happen. And so if you have a vitamin A deficiency, your skin will not be able to basically form, like it won't be able to build itself. And so you need to get retinol. And one of the best sources of retinol is like grass-fed dairy fat. So grass-fed butter, grass-fed milk, ice cream, whatever you want. But the best source of retinol is liver, like beef liver, lamb liver, whatever. like incomparably dense. But the thing is, no one wants to eat that much liver. So dairy is basically the best way for most people to get it, because it like is actively delicious, whereas liver is maybe, you know, palatable at best for most people. So that's important for skin. Collagen, of course, is important for skin. Like that's literally the proteins that the soft tissue are made of in your entire body: tendons, ligaments, joints, skin. That's made of collagen. Vitamin C is necessary for your body to manufacture its own collagen. So that's important. And what other vitamin for skin? Vitamin E is uniquely important if people are exposed to a lot of unsaturated fats from seed oils, which is very popular to talk about these days. And so the unsaturated fats get stuck in your body fat basically over many years of eating canola oil or soybean oil or whatever it is. And vitamin E helps antioxidant. It's an antioxidant for unsaturated fats. And so if these are in your subcutaneous fat and like the layer of fat right below your skin, they will oxidize your skin basically, and can cause all sorts of problems. And it makes it more easier for you to get sunburned, for example. So by taking vitamin E, you can help flush those out more quickly and go back to having better skin.
What are your thoughts on extra virgin olive oil as a cooking oil, or even to add to your meals to increase the absorption of fat soluble vitamins such as vitamin A, D, E, and K?
So I'm Italian, so I should love olive oil, right? But personally, the fewer seed oils I eat, the less unsaturated fats that I consume, which unsaturated fats are like the single worst thing I think that people eat on, you know, in like the modern diet, like the canola oil, but also like fish oil supplements are unsaturated fats too. And maybe you have questions about that, but the more unsaturated fats that I eat, like the less that even olive oil appeals to me. So like chemically speaking, you shouldn't really cook with olive oil. The more heat it's exposed to, the more likely that its fats will oxidize, because it has a lot of monounsaturated fats, which are somewhat stable, but they're prone to oxidation at higher temperatures, whereas saturated fats basically will not oxidize. So I cook with butter or ghee for everything, basically. And if I use olive oil, it's only as like a condiment, like to dip some bread in or to put on top of like a potato. But honestly, like the more, like the further I go, the less appeal. I eat olive oil, like, even like good quality olive oil, like, yeah, like it's the real deal. And I'll just prefer the butter. But the other thing about olive oil too that people have to be careful with is that most olive oil, and I have a study somewhere that looked at this, most olive oil is not olive oil. Like most olive oil on the grocery store shelves is like adulterated with sketchy oils, canola oil, soybean oil, whatever. And it's very hard to find a real, authentic, high quality version. So even if you're getting olive oil, you may not actually be getting olive oil. You may be getting something else. So the safest option in that sense as well, if for the lack of quality controls, is probably something like butter.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I actually was hosting a retreat there very recently and was able to get someone. This is what I'm trying to do: connect people back to the growers. They were based in a country in Europe. They were growing the olives themselves. They were cold pressing the extra virgin olive oil and driving it back to Ireland, then supplying it to small scale health food shops. And that's where you're going to find your best quality foods, your best quality products, such as extra virgin olive oil or raw milk. We'll take the example. Going to source and is going to get you your best bang for your buck, nutritionally and for your health as well, which is really important. And we were touching on the likes of a lot of people we've mentioned and often do get recommended cod liver oil or fish oils for in capsules. I just want you, I already know, but I want you to say it yourself in your own words. Fish oils, omega-3 in plastic capsules. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. Yeah. So I think people generally understand that like omega-6s, like canola oil and saturated fats are bad, right?
Inflammation, of course. With
Yeah.
3 being the anti-inflammatory.
I understand, but if they already accept that omega-6s are bad, it's like people have to understand why they're bad, right? So omega-6 unsaturated fats are bad because of the unsaturation, right? So omega-6 fatty acids have 2 double bonds in like the hydrocarbon chain. That's what makes them unsaturated. So if you look at the picture of it, they're not hydrogens everywhere. There's 2 spots along this chain where there's no hydrogens. and that's what makes them unsaturated. Saturated means it's full of hydrogens. So omega-6 has two unsaturated carbons, two of them. And so like that's a problem. The more unsaturated it is, the more prone to oxidizing it is. That's the whole point, because at those little weak bonds or whatever, like they can break down. And so the more of those you have, the worse. That's like why people, all of your listeners, and anyone in the health world who accepts, which most people do, that omega-6 is bad, it's because of the unsaturation. So now, like, let's think about omega-3s. If you go and look, which is very easy to find, like go to Wikipedia and search for like omega-3 fatty acids. Like there's a few of them. It's very easy to find. All of them have more double bonds. They're more unsaturated than the omega-6 fatty acids. Like they're more unsaturated, which means they're even more prone to oxidation, and they decay more rapidly and more spontaneously. And this affects every omega-3, whether it's a flaxseed oil, whether it's a fish oil, whether it's cod liver oil. Things like these are EPA, DHA, ALA. Like these oils are highly unstable. And we know this because people say, hey, season your cast iron pan with flaxseed oil. Well, why do they do that? Because flaxseed oil is so many double bonds, it's so unstable that when you season it on the stove, it'll turn into plastic. Like that hard black coating on cast iron, it's basically plastic. It turns into plastic like better than any other oil. And it's flaxseed oil. And then you eat it, you know? Like people are eating this thing that like turns into plastic. Like that's the whole point of it. Like flaxseed oil was used in oil-based paint in like the Renaissance. Like flaxseed, also known as linseed oil, which is like the industrial term for it. It's the same thing, by the way. Like that was used in oil-based paint up until like petroleum was invented, because like it's called a drying oil. It means that it hardens when it's exposed to oxygen. It turns into plastic. And so one of the things that you'll notice if you like increasingly so, especially if you go to more of the places in the US where people are more obese, like it's not as if people are just like fat and like, you know, they're just expanded, right? It's not as if they're just ballooned up. Like you'll see in their skin that there's like these chunks and like these like divots and patterns that it's like it looks like globby or almost. Like you get that because of the unsaturated fats. And so anyway, yeah, so it doesn't matter if it's cod liver oil or whatever else. All fish oils are even more unsaturated than the flaxseed oils, ironically enough. Some of them have, like, I think EPA has like 4 or 5 double bonds in there. It's so unsaturated. And so these things will turn into plastic and carcinogens almost instantly. And the reason why they exist, by the way, is because in the Arctic and the ocean, it's very cold. And so if the fat tissue of the fish was butter, they would not be able to swim. They wouldn't be able to move because they'd be like a block of fat, right? Because as the colder the fat gets, the harder it gets. So it's like basically antifreeze. Like the unsaturated fats in their body prevent them from freezing solid and being able to swim in Arctic waters. But guess what? Your body is not Arctic waters. You know, we're warm-blooded. It's 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit or whatever that is in Celsius. And those fats are very unstable. So I'll give one last anecdote about this. There's a very popular nutrition conference that I will not name, that people go to, and cod liver oil is very widely used amongst those attendees of the conference because they really believe in it. And while many of the old people there, a lot of old people go, and while many of the old people there are in good shape, like they're not overly fat, they're not overly skinny, like generally speaking, they are doing pretty well. They have a lot of brown spots on their skin, which you may have seen in old people. It's very common. The brand, like old people spots, whatever you want to call them, also known as liver spots, those are formed by unsaturated fats. And so like they get in your skin, they get in your liver, they get in your brain, this causes Alzheimer's. This is why seed oils cause Alzheimer's. But point is, they eat a lot of cod liver oil. They're healthy in every other regard, but they eat a lot of cod liver oil and they still have these spots, which shouldn't exist. Like look at old people, pictures of old people from long ago. They don't have those spots. It's not a naturally occurring thing. And so, you know, even though the cod liver oil, yeah, has vitamin A and has vitamin D, like, so what? It also has incredibly unsaturated fatty acids, and they cause, you know, all these problems. So if you think seed oils are bad, you must understand that unsaturated fats from fish and, you know, omega-3s are even worse, and avoid them like the plague. And so the like for example, cod liver oil, sure, like yeah, get your vitamin A from butter and like from grass-fed, like raw milk or liver, and get your vitamin D from the sun, and you don't even need cod liver oil. Like problem solved. Yeah, so big problems.
Love that. There's so much to unpack in that. I even want to go back towards the likes of fish. Do you recommend fish? Would fish be in your diet on a regular basis?
Yeah, so this is once again like those. It's like the difference between eating like peanut oil or eating peanuts, right? Like if you eat like a tablespoon of peanut oil, like you're eating the oil from like I don't even know how many dozens of pounds of peanuts, like more peanuts than you would ever even imagine eating in your life. You ate in like a tablespoonful of peanut oil. So it's this idea of like processing, right? Like the same thing with sugar. If you eat like fruit, like an apple, or if you drink a Coca-Cola, right? In a Coke, you're drinking, I don't know, like 40 pounds of apples worth of sugar, right? So it's like an unrealistic quantity that you're consuming. So I think like there's no disputing that many cultures eat like Arctic, like cold water fish, and they've been fine. I personally don't think it makes sense to base a diet off of it. I think based on anthropology, humans, whenever possible, will choose to eat like land animals as opposed to fish. But yeah, so in regards to cold water fish, they have more unsaturated fats. I wouldn't freak out about it because they have a lot of other nutrients as well. But I feel like if you're going to eat, salmon for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, then you might want to reconsider. But I have no problem eating a fish. And if you're going to eat fish, warm water fish or shellfish are probably a better option. Because given that there's
Oysters and mussels and things like that, they would have zinc in them as well.
yeah, exactly. Like you don't want to you don't want to get too reductionist about it. That's kind of the whole problem, or one of the problems with like food is like if you think of food only as like a set of nutrients like combined in a little package, like you're missing out on the bigger picture of food. There's more than just a vitamin or mineral in food, so or like one specific bad thing. So I wouldn't want to get too reductionist and be like, oh, never eat fish because it has this one problem thing. If you think like that, you'll never eat anything because everything has some problem in it. But I would not take fish oils. I would not eat flax oil. I wouldn't eat flax seeds at all, honestly. But like I wouldn't eat any of the oils, fish oil pills, EPA supplements, DHA supplements, cod liver oil, krill oil, algae oil, any of those things. I would stay away from it. And if you're gonna eat cold water fish, just like eat it moderately. And the seafood that's most valuable, I think, is actually like the shellfish, like the oysters, and those kind of things.
Interesting. I've actually just got oysters at the country market as well. So that's good to hear. But I suppose we've touched on the likes of vitamin D there, and sardines would definitely be something that's in my diet as well, due to the fact that they're vitamin D content from natural sources. I like to get my vitamins from food, because food is medicine, and the more food you eat, the more benefits for it, because supplements have a totally different effect on the body as opposed to whole foods. But vitamin D coming from the sun, I know you're a major believer in the sun, but I want you to tell the listeners about what you recommend to people and how much to get in that sense of the sun.
Yeah, vitamin D is complicated, and there's a bit of controversy about it lately. So it's classic. So the reason why vitamin D became so widely regarded is because people noticed that in the blood of sick people, like the vitamin D, the format of vitamin D that floats around in the blood, I believe this is called 2,5-hydroxy vitamin D. As back up a little bit there, like no vitamin is just one molecule. Vitamins are a whole complex of molecules, and they go through different formats depending on like what's needed in the body and where. And so the body will convert often very freely between various forms of vitamins. So like even vitamin A, for example, like retinol, there's also retinol palmitate, like all the retinoids, like it's a whole complex. So same with vitamin D, same with vitamin K. There's vitamin K1, K2, but then there's multiple forms of vitamin K2. Vitamin E, there's like 4 different like tocopherols and another 4 different tocotrienols that are vitamin E. And it's like, yeah, it's complicated. So to get back to the vitamin D, the one form of vitamin D that they measure that's in the blood, they observed that when people are sick, it's lower. So they concluded that low vitamin D causes like, your immune system to be suppressed, and that like it causes a weak immune system. And so that's honestly like that's what led to all the hype, the modern hype about vitamin D supplements. And so if you think about that though for a second, you'll notice that that investigation doesn't necessarily prove whether vitamin D suppresses the immune system or low vitamin D suppresses the immune system. It just says there's an association. And so there's research by other individuals that is very compelling that suggests that like vitamin D, lower vitamin D is actually a symptom of an illness. And it's not like the cause. Like the body, when it's sick, will like the vitamin D levels will drop, but that's a result of the illness, not like an indicator. And so, we don't necessarily know what the cause is. So by supplementing vitamin D, like one of the things that, by supplementing vitamin D, you don't know what the causal chain of events is. So this guy, this researcher thinks that by supplementing vitamin D and increasing the amounts, you're actually suppressing the immune system, right? Because if the immune system is active, you're sick, and a byproduct of it being active is lower vitamin D, then maybe increasing the vitamin D then suppresses the immune system. And so this is consistent with a lot of the effects that people observe with vitamin D. They say, oh, I feel better, this and that, I didn't get sick. But like, is it because your body actually healed, or is it because you just suppress the immune system, right? So it's not so clear that when you're healthy, or when you're feeling good, it's not so clear that like, is it because you're just not sick, or is it because your immune system, which would be giving symptoms of illness, like is inactive, right? The sickness doesn't give you the symptoms. The immune system gives you the symptoms, fevers, shakes, body aches, whatever. That's from your immune system, and they're usually for a reason. And so if you're suppressing this, you might feel better, but you're not necessarily fixing the problem. So vitamin D supplementation is considered, or another example, vitamin D3 cholecalciferol, which is the main ingredient in that one format of vitamin D that's in supplements, is the active ingredient in rat poisons. Certainly, like it's very highly concentrated in rat poison. So, you can say, oh, it's just a lot of it. So the dose makes the poison, but nonetheless, it is an ingredient in rat poison. And so, by supplementing this one format of chemical in a way that's certainly artificial, ignoring the whole complex of other vitamin D components and ignoring the fact that it may actually suppress the immune system, I don't think supplementing vitamin D is a great idea. I think foods that naturally contain vitamin D related compounds like are great. So like pork lard, milk, raw grass-fed milk, or even if it's not raw, vitamin D is still there. The dairy fat, like any properly pastured animal will absorb their own vitamin D, and that'll get into their fat, is important. And by taking like magnesium, your body is able to produce its own vitamin D. That's another thing, is like you can produce your own vitamin D, which means you don't need it from the food, right? Like you can produce it just naturally. You can produce it from the sun, and even just like hang out in the sunlight, like even if it's cold out, like you'll still your skin exposure like that will still produce some vitamin D. So I personally take no vitamin D supplement. I don't think it's a good idea. I eat food, and then whenever I can get sun, I do. And I also, different people of different like ethnicities have different abilities to store and manufacture vitamin D. So Northern Europeans actually store a much higher amount of vitamin D in their body fat, which is designed to get released over the winter when it's cold. So if you're in Northern Europe or whatever, and you're out in the sun when it's sunny in the summertime, you should be fine over the winter time. But yeah, I don't know if that confused more than it
No,
helps.
and I suppose we'll just break it down that myself would be quite similar to yourself. The fact that I don't take a lot of supplements, the fact that we're getting our vitamins, especially vitamin D, being firstly made through our sunlight exposure on our skin, which is actually needed in a necessary amount for the production of vitamin D. But not only that, increased blood flow, which leads to, I suppose, happier individuals. With increased blood flow, you have every different vitamin and mineral traveling in the blood, getting to where it needs to go, organs, your brain and your skin. And as a result of that, again, you become happier, because tryptophan is a protein, essential amino acid that then ends up in your brain, which then produces those happy hormones. And that's why they say, vitamin D is the sunshine vitamin that makes people happier. Those are kind of the science. I'm into science, but I try to break it down to us. I suppose the most basic thing to people, to get your vitamins and minerals from whole foods, get outside. I'll be a firm believer in the fact of grounding, cold water exposure for, again, benefits of reducing inflammation in the body, which is the root cause of so many different chronic illnesses, and getting things, I suppose, local, fresh. And I do say, this is my kind of saying, it's local, fresh and organic, with the fact that it's, suppose, chemical free is something that is comparable. The word organic is actually a registered term. So if you were to take, for example, to grow carrots or potatoes or onions or any vegetable out in your back garden, you can't say that that's organic by law. It's the word is registered. So if we had a product that was grown by myself, because I am registered as an organic grower, I have a small plot which has fruit trees, there's berries, and there's different vegetable crops, and those are registered as organic. They are chemical free, and there's an inspection involved in that. Again, it's to keep regulation. It's to stop the cowboys making food and going, yeah, this is chemical free, and then they're actually at home and they're spraying the things sideways with harsh chemicals such as that glyphosate, which is so poisonous to people. It's unbelievable. So the sooner people try and get things from a reputable farmer that grows a chemical free, it doesn't necessarily have to have a label. It just has to be the best food source that they can get local. White is shorter miles, better nutrition for themselves, the better. And this is a great conversation, and I want to even try go towards, what are your thoughts on the vegan diet, Stephen? I would love to hear, I suppose, your ideas on that. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah, vegans. I want to make a comment about what you just said. Like, many people will go to local farms or whatever, and because they if they don't know too much about how the food regulations work, and they'll ask farmers like, oh, is it organic? And then like it's legally not organic, but because they haven't obtained the certification, but they use the same methods or even better methods than they would have to in order to get that certification. The problem with organic certification is it takes often many years, and it's somewhat expensive for farmers to obtain. So if your choice is between like a local farmer who makes stuff, and it's like you looked at this farm, it's like chemical free, the cows are just hanging out there, whatever, versus like finding something in the grocery store that says organic, you'll probably be better off with a local farmer, because the organic certification still allows certain practices that are maybe not ideal. Like it's more like an industrial thing. Like you can have an organic like monocropped farm, for example, which is like, as I'm sure you're aware, like not ideal for like the land and the soil and all these other things. But yeah, so the organic word is not necessarily necessary. What's important is what is conveyed by the term. And so if farmers are meeting that standard, whether it's been registered or not, and you're able to verify it, by talking to them, then that's totally fine. So yeah, vegans. I mean, I think.
No, we won't demonize vegans. Vegan diet will go so.
Okay, vegan diet. That's sure much better. I think it's very it can be very catchy. Like it makes sense, right? Like I think like what it's trying to do, like it tries to appeal to certain instincts in people that I think are like probably pretty good. Like you don't want to hurt the environment, you don't want to hurt animals, you don't want to you want to be healthy or whatever. The problem is like it appeals to those things, but doesn't actually deliver on any of them. So I have nothing against like the goals most vegans have. The goal of the diet, right? Like animal ethics, environmental sustainability, and like the claim of health. Like those are all good goals to have. The problem is like that diet just doesn't fulfill those. So I mean, I where to start? I guess the start is there's never been a single culture in all of human history in the anthropological record that has been vegan and survived. I like there's no vegan practice anywhere in human culture up until like the mid 1800s when I believe it was invented and started to first get popularized. Even the cultures of the East that people love to talk about, there's vegetarians, absolutely, like Buddhists, Hindus, and many Christian traditional practices like during Lent, or like monks in monasteries, like, yeah, they're vegetarians, but there are no vegans. They're cooking with butter, they're eating milk, they eat eggs. And so the historical precedent, point one. Point number two is that in order to have a vegan diet, it's impossible to do that locally. And so therefore it's highly dependent on an advanced system of technology that is definitionally incompatible with like evolved history, right? If the only time in all of human history you can do it is right now, then that's like an aberration. It's not, it's not something that's like traditional in any way. It's not something that we've been evolved consistent in accordance with. And so in order to have a modern vegan diet, you need to have avocados from Mexico. You need to have like pineapples from Hawaii. You need to get quinoa from Bolivia. You need to get like nuts from Brazil. You need cashews from India. You need rice from like Asia or whatever. You need all these products that depend on a very advanced global carbon-based supply chain, which not only is, requires technology, it's a lot of fossil fuels were wasted in getting all these foods to you, right? All the papayas and mangoes that you eat at the grocery store in Manhattan in the wintertime, like how did they get there, right? They were flown or they were on a boat, and many of them spoiled, and there's a lot of food waste, right? Because people don't buy it, they got to throw it out. It's very like the supply chain is just very bad for the environment. It's not sustainable at all. And then of course, if you want to look at nutrients, most like there are nutrients that you just can't find in foods of plant origin. Like they're just not there. Vitamin B12, obvious, but vitamin A, people are less aware because they think carrots have vitamin A, but as we described earlier, they don't. You need retinol, and retinol only exists in foods of animal origin. The vitamin D as well, like you're not going to find that in plants. You'll find vitamin D2, but that's not what we want. You're not going to find the natural sources, anything other than like pork lard and like, grass-fed dairy fat, et cetera, et cetera. In terms of like minerals, a lot of the minerals like calcium, for example, that you'll find in like supposedly spinach, it's in a form that your body doesn't actually utilize. It's in a form called like calcium oxalate, which doesn't actually break, like your body's not really able to process it. It doesn't break down. And if you're lucky, you'll just, excrete it in your feces. And if you're not lucky, because you have leaky gut or something, it'll get absorbed by your small intestine and it'll end up in your joints causing arthritis, and like it'll end up in your kidneys causing kidney stones. That's like from calcium oxalate. Yeah, there are a lot of unique anti-nutrients to plant foods: phytic acid, lectins, phytoestrogens being chief among them. Those are typically found in the beans and like legumes and seeds. Legumes and seeds being like among the most toxic of all the plant foods. So for example, ricin, which is a poison that like people who grew up, who were around in the 90s, I wasn't, but people who were, well, I was born, but I didn't remember it. People who were around then might have known that it was like terrorist plots. We're using ricin to like, send to people, and it was like going to be a bioweapon or something. Like that comes from like beans, right? It's a lectin. It comes from beans. And so the seeds themselves, being the most valuable part of the plant, are like the most highly defended part of the plant. Like, so people like Paul Saladino will talk about this, and I think he takes it a bit too far, but he'll talk about how plants, since they can't fight you with like claws and teeth, and like they can't, eat you or bite you, and they can't run away, they have evolved chemical defense mechanisms to allow them to survive, basically. And so the seed being the most valuable part of the plant, because it's like, the baby, right? Like where an alligator can like, kill you if you try to mess with her eggs. Like she'll bite you, she'll drown you, whatever. Like a plant can't do that. So it's got to defend its seeds by some other means. And so that's why we see so many of these anti-nutrients like in seeds themselves, because nature knows that, hey, if my seeds get eaten, then I won't be able to reproduce. And the seeds specifically, not the fruits, the seeds. So I typically don't really eat any seeds at all. I also don't really find many of them delicious. Like, I mean, in Christmas time, I'll have chestnuts because they're good, but it's like, even then it's like nothing compares to like raw milk ice cream and like blueberries, So yeah, anyway, vegan diet, dependent on seeds, dependent on global supply chain, dependent on, or it's historically inconsistent. Oh, and the last thing is, in order to farm like plant foods, like you need animal inputs. Like as an organic farmer, I'm sure you're aware, the primary and almost exclusively organic fertilizer is manure from animals. And so if we weren't farming animals, where would we get the fertilizer, right? So like you can't really, like if you're buying organic like plant products, you're buying organic lettuce, whatever, the fertilizer that fertilized that food was from an animal, right? Like there's no escaping this. And of course, if you're not getting organic food, which many plant food in terms of quantity are not organic, if you're not getting organic foods, then you're getting foods that were sprayed with ungodly, horrible synthetic chemicals, which I'm sure you also talk about. So yeah, it's not really viable. Like proper agriculture requires, it's like a whole cycle, right? Circle of life. It requires animals to eat the grass, and then they poop, and then you take their poop and fertilize the plants, and then you eat some of the plants, but then the part of the plants you don't eat, you feed back to the animals, and it's this whole thing. And to take one part of the equation out of it, it will disrupt the entire system. So yeah, I mean, I could go on for hours, but that's the high points.
Yeah, and it's a huge topic in itself. And then I suppose to play devil's advocate, I won't go into too much more detail about it. Those anti-nutrients, there are ways for them to be reduced, such as soaking and steeping and things like that. And I suppose nothing on this planet or this earth really wants to be eaten. Playing, I suppose, up for people who are vegetarians as well. The fact that the alligator, or the example of the beef, the cattle, the pork, they don't want to be eaten either. But as a result of that, we end up eating those. But that's just I suppose a totally separate podcast in itself. And that brings us on to, I suppose, the likes of your app, okay, Shire app. I want you to, suppose, tell the listeners a little bit about that and what you are proposing in and doing with this.
Yes, this brings us back to a few of the points we discussed. One of which is finding raw milk, right? Like and like you're talking about finding like these olive oil farmers, finding like your local farmer, and like that's possible for maybe someone like you or me who spends all their time like talking to and researching and doing this whole thing. But for someone who doesn't, it's very inconvenient. That's kind of the big problem. So like even there's so many issues with like the food supply system. But like the first issue right off the bat is even finding out where to buy the high quality food, finding the farmer, finding the farm, like you don't know where it is. And okay, then if you do find it, right, you have to, it's very hard to get once you even know where it is. You got to go there, you got to drive, it's probably far away, maybe you don't have a car. Their hours in their little farm stand are not going to be very like good usually. And sometimes it's like it's online ordering only, you show up, it's cash only, whatever. It's hard to then acquire. And then of course we have the issue of just like society in general, or more like an economic issue. There aren't even that many of these farms available. So there aren't enough people producing good quality food. And it's not that there can't be. Some people make the argument that like, oh, we need food and agricultural technology to be able to feed all the people on earth. Like this is BS. Like well-run like organic permaculture farms like are more productive per acre than anything else. Whether it's like monocrop soybeans or whatever you want. So we can do it. It's just, I think the limiting factor is probably human labor. And we didn't need to get to the economics of it. It's a whole separate thing. But the point is, so my app called Shire is designed to make all of this easier. And the first way that we're going to do this is just by having a well-maintained database, like all in one place of everywhere you can go to get quality food. And so we have a list of like methods that we consider to be high quality specifically. Includes things like regenerative agriculture, organic, like chemical free, pesticide free, grass fed, like all seed oil free, all of these like tiers. And it applies to restaurants as well as farms, bakeries, like farmers markets, etc. So any place where you can go to get food that meets these quality standards will be on Shire. And you just put in your zip code or your address, and it'll show up with everything that's nearby you that has food that's like good, basically. And so all in one place, you'll be able to find it. And so that's like the first step. Our further ambitions are to allow like the actual purchasing and ordering of this, like to make that more streamlined. And there are certain like farm business models that I don't need to go into that would be greatly benefited by a more integrated system. But from the user standpoint, and this is like we're launching the first version officially next Sunday, by the way. So in 8 days from the time of this recording, we're working on it. The initial version will just allow you to go on and find the high quality food wherever you are. And so it's not limited to the US. Obviously, I can't magically will raw milk into existence in like Canada, but we're getting there. Anywhere in the world. And so in order to get there, we have people who are putting in all the farms. We're also going to need people themselves who know of farms to put them in as well. And so the goal is to catalog basically every place on earth where you can get really good quality food. And that's the start, and we're just going to go from there. And so the website is called shireapp.io. Our Instagram is shireapp, SHIREAPP. So find us there for more information, and yeah, it's going to be good.
Man, I tell you, this podcast has definitely been up there with one of the most interesting conversations, from the likes of the food that you're recommending that people have often been demonizing, like some raw milk, the vitamins recommended for skin health. We went and touched on the likes of sun health and the benefits of it as well. But I suppose just before we wrap up, I want you to tell, I suppose, the listeners your hashtag names and places where they can, suppose, best reach out to yourself. I'll be putting it all in the show notes to be all spelled out for people to, I suppose, click and be sent directly over to your page, so we can, suppose, further promote this app about getting people more local, fresh produce that benefits them long term, their health.
Nice. Yeah, everything is really at really tan man, REALLY tan man. Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. I also have a Substack that I started recently, which is like a newsletter platform where I go into a bit more in depth in things, recent articles on like vitamin E and detoxifying from seed oils. You can find that. It's on my link tree that you'll find. It's reallytanman.substack.com. And then, of course, the things for Shire are on Twitter and Instagram. It's just Shire app, and all the information is going to be in there.
Brilliant. I say, Stephen, this is an absolute cracker of a podcast. Swear down, as I always end the likes of these podcasts by saying, stay tuned, stay classy, and keep it organic.